You won't believe what happened when my neighborhood's HOA decided to cut down my 200-year-old oak tree, the one that had stood tall long before any of us moved here. That tree wasn't just a part of my yard, it was a piece of history, a symbol of my family's roots, and a peaceful spot where I spent countless afternoons. But one day, without warning or permission, they took a chainsaw to it and left me stunned. How could they just erase something so precious like that? What followed was a chain of events I never saw coming, something that ended up changing everything in the neighborhood and hit the HOA right where it hurt most: their wallet. From the start, the conflict wasn't just about a tree. It was about power, respect, and the lengths people will go to protect what's theirs. The HOA was supposed to keep the neighborhood running smoothly, but instead, they became the villains of this story. They underestimated me and how far I'd go to get justice. You'll hear about the meetings, the threats, and the hidden rules they tried to use against me, but I wasn't backing down. I had a plan, and it was one they never expected. As the tension grew, neighbors started taking sides, and the peaceful community I once knew began to crack. What looked like a small dispute over a tree turned into a full-blown battle with serious consequences. The story took twists that no one could have predicted. And trust me, the payback wasn't just a slap on the wrist, was something much bigger. Something that left the HOA's leadership facing more trouble than they ever imagined. I'll take you through every step of this wild ride. From the heartbreak of losing that oak to the surprising way I turned the tables. But first, you need to hear the full story behind that tree and what really happened behind closed doors. Stick around, because the truth is about to come out. And it's way more intense than you think. For years, that oak tree was more than just wood and leaves. It was part of my family's story. My grandparents planted it when they first moved here, and it had watched over generations, weathering storms, droughts, and everything in between. It shaded our backyard, cooled the house in the summer, and gave shelter to birds and squirrels. The neighborhood kids even called it the magic tree because of the stories we told under its branches. Losing it felt like losing a piece of myself. The HOA, though, saw it differently. They claimed the tree was too old and a risk to the community. But honestly, no one had ever brought up any real problems before. There was no warning, no consultation. One morning, I woke up to the sound of chainsaws and saw workers cutting down that massive oak like it was just any old tree. I was furious, but also shocked by how powerless I felt. I tried talking to the HOA board, hoping to find some explanation or even an apology. Instead, I got cold responses and vague excuses about neighborhood safety and property rules. It wasn't just about the tree anymore, it was about control. The HOA acted like they owned the place, like the people living here didn't matter. I wasn't the only one upset. Some neighbors whispered that the board was too strict, maybe even hiding things from us. Rumors started about money mishandling, shady deals, and unfair enforcement of rules. But no one had proof, just stories that didn't quite add up. That's when I decided to dig deeper. If the HOA thought they could just erase my family's legacy and intimidate me into silence, they were wrong. I started looking into their records, their past decisions, and the way they managed the community funds. What I found wasn't just surprising, it was explosive. The conflict was far bigger than a fallen tree, and the real story was just beginning to unfold. As I started digging into the HOA's records, I quickly realized this wasn't just about a single bad decision or one reckless tree removal. There were patterns, hidden fees, questionable contracts, and board members who seemed more interested in protecting their own pockets than serving the community. Some neighbors had noticed too, but most were afraid to speak up. The HOA had built a reputation for being strict and unforgiving. So many just kept their heads down, hoping to avoid trouble. But after what they did to my oak tree, I wasn't about to stay silent. I reached out to a few longtime residents who'd lived here way before me. They told me stories about how the HOA had slowly tightened control over the years, changing rules without proper votes, pushing through new regulations that didn't make sense, and penalizing people for small things while letting bigger issues slide. One neighbor even shared how the HOA had fined him hundreds of dollars for having a slightly overgrown lawn. Yet they ignored the rising dues that never seemed to be accounted for. It felt like the HOA was running the neighborhood like their own private business, not a community group. Meanwhile, the board started turning up the pressure on me. Letters, warning of fines, threats about legal action, even vague accusations that I was disrupting the peace. It was clear they saw me as a threat, but I had no choice. This was bigger than a tree. It was about standing up for fairness, for respect, and for all the neighbors who felt trapped by the HOA's iron grip. At the same time, I found allies in unexpected places. Some neighbors who had been quiet before began sharing their own frustrations. Others wondered if there were ways to challenge the HOA's authority legally. I started talking with a local attorney, trying to understand what rights we really had. The conflict was growing, pulling the whole neighborhood into a fight that felt like it was spiraling out of control. What came next? Well, that's where things get really complicated. The HOA wasn't going down without a fight, and neither was I, but the truth. It's about to get messier than anyone expected. As the weeks passed, the tension in the neighborhood grew thicker than ever. The once quiet streets now buzzed with whispered conversations and cautious glances. The HOA board seemed more aggressive, sending out more notices and tightening their grip in every possible way. It was like they knew I was poking around and wanted to intimidate me before I uncovered something they couldn't handle. But instead of backing down, I felt more determined. Every late-night email I sent, every document I pored over, brought me closer to something big, something that could shake up the entire HOA. Some neighbors began openly supporting me, but others were torn. A few feared the consequences of standing against the board, fines, legal trouble, or worse, being ostracized from the community. The split was visible at every HOA meeting. What used to be polite discussions now erupted into heated arguments. The community I once loved was divided, caught in a battle that felt like it was spiraling out of control. Then came the day I discovered the hidden contracts agreements the board had signed without any homeowner approval. The deals involved massive payments to outside companies for maintenance that never happened. Money was disappearing, and the evidence pointed directly at the people who were supposed to protect our neighborhood. I knew this could be the proof everyone needed. But it also meant I was stepping into dangerous territory. The board's response was swift and harsh. Suddenly, I was facing lawsuits, baseless accusations, and pressure from people who once smiled. When they passed me on the street, the stress was intense, and I wondered if I had bitten off more than I could chew. Yet, giving up wasn't an option, not after what they did to the oak tree. Not after the damage to the trust and peace in our community. Everything was coming to a head. The next HOA meeting would be a turning point, and I could feel the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on everyone. Would the truth finally come out, or would the board silence me for good? The whole neighborhood held its breath, waiting for the moment that could change everything. Just when I thought I had the upper hand, something happened that changed everything. As I was preparing for the big HOA meeting, gathering evidence, lining up neighbors to speak, and feeling cautiously hopeful, I got a call from an unexpected source. A former board member, someone who had quietly left the HOA months earlier, reached out with information that blew the whole situation wide open. He warned me that the problems ran deeper than I imagined. Not only were there shady contracts and missing money, but some of the board members were actively trying to cover it up by targeting anyone who dared to investigate, including me. He handed over emails and documents that showed a hidden plan to force me out. The board wasn't just using fines and legal threats anymore. They had hired private investigators to dig into my personal life, hoping to find dirt that could discredit me or scare me into silence. Suddenly, the battle wasn't just about the tree or community rules, it was personal. A T wanted to break me. And they were willing to cross lines I never thought they would. This revelation sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Some neighbors who had been on the fence started to fear the board's power even more, while others doubled down on supporting me. But the stakes had risen. It wasn't just about fairness anymore. It was about standing up against intimidation, fighting for justice, and exposing corruption that was hurting everyone. The HOA had turned into something unrecognizable, more like a small empire protecting its secrets than a group meant to serve the community. With the next meeting just days away, the pressure was crushing. I knew the board would come prepared. But now I had new proof and new allies. The question was, could we turn this tide? Or was the HOA going to succeed in shutting this whole story down before it even got started? The truth was hanging by. The day of the big HOA meeting arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. Neighbors filled the community hall, whispers bouncing off the walls as everyone waited to see what would happen. The board members sat at the front, trying to look calm. But the tension was clear. I took a deep breath and stepped up, ready to lay everything out: the hidden contracts, the missing money, and the board's attempts to intimidate me with private investigators. The room fell silent as I spoke, the weight of years of frustration pouring out in every word. One by one, neighbors came forward with their own stories of unfair fines and ignored complaints. It was like a dam had broken. The board scrambled to respond, but their excuses started to crumble under the weight of the evidence. Then, just when it seemed like the truth would finally win, an unexpected twist hit the room. The former board member who had warned me earlier revealed something nobody saw coming. A whistleblower had secretly recorded conversations, proving the current board was planning to sell common community land without homeowner approval, a move that would have put the neighborhood's future in jeopardy. That revelation shocked everyone. The community erupted with outrage. The board had crossed a line even deeper than cutting down my 200-year-old oak. With the evidence laid bare, the HOA leadership couldn't escape accountability. The meeting ended with a vote to remove several board members and launch a full audit of the association's finances. But just as I thought the battle was over, another surprise came. The former board member disclosed that the oak tree had actually been protected by a historical preservation law, which meant the HOA's illegal removal could bring serious legal consequences and a hefty fine. The payoff wasn't just about money. It was about respect and justice finally coming full circle. The HOA was left bankrupt, facing lawsuits and a community that refused to be silenced. And me, I found something more valuable than victory: hope that standing up, even against the odds, can change everything. Yet, as the dust settled, I couldn't shake one question. What other secrets were still buried beneath this quiet neighborhood?